time now to take you through the morning's papers. Here with me today to go through them are the journalist Badisha Mamata and the broadcaster Pete Price. So very good morning to both of you. Lovely to see you both. Looking bright and sunny this chilly morning. Let's get cracking then on some of these front pages, shall we? Pete, you've picked out our first one this morning. This is the Daily Mirror's front page. Their headline, another fine mess. And this is all about Rishi Sunak not wearing a seatbelt.
It is indeed. And good morning to everybody. I'm delighted to be back on Sky around the world, which is really exciting. Now, another fine mess. The man I am not a fan of, but he's trying to run a country. He's taken his belt off to do a video, to make the video work perfectly. Isn't there more important things in this country? We've been in a pandemic. We're trying to get money back into tills. We're trying to do everything. And all they can do is put a front page, and it's in every paper about the Prime Minister. I have taken my seatbelt off loads of times. Do I now go and give myself up at the police station? You know, he's a human being. You know, that's it. He's a human being, and he's trying to run the country. Does annoy me, this story.
OK, well, but Pete, some people might take it more seriously. They might say this is the second fixed penalty notice he's had from police. It's quite unusual for a Prime Minister to break the law. And the other criticism is, if you don't believe that it is such a serious issue, at worst he looks quite foolish, doesn't he, to not think of these things or have a team around him that reminds him.
He's got a team around him. He's just doing a video. So on the split second, let's do a video now, or we're planning it. Yeah, of course it's serious to wear a seatbelt. Having said that, I had a friend many years ago who was killed because they couldn't get out of their seatbelt. That's another story. You know, the man has just taken it off. You know, he is trying to run the country, and he is human. Yeah, and he's had 2 fixed penalties. Fine. That makes him human. Does not make him a real person. I mean, everyone's ready to jump in on the bandwagon. Everyone that's jumping in and criticise him couldn't do his job and wouldn't do his job. You know, he's trying to get... I'm no fan of his, by the way, before I get castigated in the north of England. Not a fan.
Very quickly, Badisha, I don't know if you've got a thought on this. Do you think this just shows that he's human? Do you think people will be largely sympathetic?
I completely agree with Pete, actually. I think exactly what happened is exactly what appeared to happen, which is that his aide said, come on, Rishi, appeal to the young folks. Let's do a TikTok video, and in a casual, super rich style, which I think is Rishi's kind of MO. He said, sure, guys, sure, and he slipped off his seatbelt. Unfortunately, this has completely overshadowed the reason why he's traveling around the country in the first place, which was to talk about levelling up. So I agree that this is just a little bit of petty point scoring on the part of the tabloids, and that we should really be focusing on the bigger picture, which is levelling up and getting money out into the rest of the country.
OK, well, let's move on to one of those big issues that he is trying to grapple with at the moment, and issues of strikes. The Eye, Badisha, you've picked out on this subject, and this is focusing on schools in particular, isn't it?
Yes, so as we go into the late winter, very early spring season, we know there are going to be teacher strikes scheduled across February and March, and head teachers are giving parents a little bit of a heads up. I'm not sure exactly what parents are meant to do. It's not as if we live in some sort of ancient family system whereby nobody works, and they're being told to keep their kids at home on the days of the strikes because the amount of disruption is unanticipated at the moment. So head teachers are just telling parents to plan for it. But the scale of these strikes is quite large. 23,000 schools across England and Wales are going to be affected, and we don't yet know the knock-on effect on A-levels and mock A-levels. Now, the government is trying to guide schools to be a little bit softer and more lenient with their grade differentials, just in case there's a bit of disruption. But the very fact that head teachers are raising the red flag to parents makes me think that they know these strikes are going to go ahead. The teachers are in earnest because they're talking about things which have been very pressing issues across the pandemic, but really before then. Pay, the kinds of contracts they're on, career progression, benefits. Are you going to have a long career? Will you be treated well in your career? Not being overworked, not being underpaid. And I think that public support is really with the teachers. Nobody believes that the teachers are somehow being greedy or trying to game the system. Everyone knows teaching is a vocation, which is why we remember our favorite teachers from school because they wanted to be there and they were so good with us. So they're going to have to balance out the disruption with the general feeling in the country, which I do think is pro the striking teachers.
Pete, I can see you nodding there. You agree that people are behind the teachers, even though it could have a real impact, couldn't it, on the kids, but also on parents having to potentially stay home to look after them.
I think it's going to be a boring day because I'm going to agree with everything this fabulous lady I'm working with says. Miss Owen was my favourite teacher. What upsets me is that the parents, and by the way, I'm totally and utterly on the side of the teachers, but what upsets me is the parents and their fears because they're fighting to keep their jobs. They're worried about child help. So what are they going to do? How can they keep their children at home? They're as worried as everybody else. Once again, I mention it again, the pandemic, everyone's trying to get back into the real world. So it is very, very worrying for all the parents keeping their children at home, and it really is a scary thing, and it does look like it's going to be a prolonged strike over this. And by the way, the teachers work above and beyond the hours that they are paid to do, always. I've never known a teacher not do that, so they do deserve all they can get.
Okay, and Pete, you wanted to talk about the Express's front page as well, didn't you? This is about the demise of high street banks.
Yeah, I shake my head in disbelief over this, over banks and post offices. People don't realise how essential banks are, especially for the older generation. First of all, it gets them out of bed. It gets them to have a purpose in life, to go down to the high street and I'll get some money out and I'll get my businesses sorted and I'll get my bills paid. I don't think the post offices and the banks we're talking about right now, realise how important they are on the high street. I go into Liverpool, I live on the Wirral, I go there, there's very few banks left on the Wirral, there's a few banks left in Liverpool, but they're all being removed. Everybody's shopping online. We need to save our high streets. We really need to save our cities and our towns, and banks are essential. I think Lloyd's are going to close down another 40. It's dreadful. I've recently moved 3 banks, and I've been with NatWest all my life, but I've now had to move to where I go banking. Yes, I do banking on my telephone, but we need the high street. It's a way of life. It's also jobs. Please keep our banks.
Okay, yeah, and the banks, no doubt, would talk about the cost, the overheads of running those branches, I suspect. Let's look at the Times, shall we? Badisha, they have an interview with Sajid Javid, former Health Secretary, of course, now backbencher, I think. I think he said he's going to stand down at the next election, isn't he? But he is calling for a bit of a shake-up in the health service. What exactly is he calling for?
Yeah, you're exactly right. He's the former health secretary, and I think he's now liberated to say what he really thinks and feels. He's given an interesting editorial op-ed opinion piece where he says that during his time as health secretary, he was told to fix but not touch the NHS. And he's now saying, look, you can't fix it without touching it. And it may be that instead of being gooey-hearted about the NHS and saying how much we love it, we cannot touch this fragile creature that we adore so much. We need to look at asking those patients who can afford it to consider paying for GP appointments and paying for A&E visits and paying wherever they can. Now, that sounds scandalous because it should be that the NHS is the National Health Service. It's paid for with our taxes. It has a lot of goodwill. But what we know in the real world is that people who can afford it are already converting over a little bit to private health services where and when they can. In fact, the much in trouble Rishi Sunak has been in trouble recently again for admitting that he did the same thing. But what we're seeing politically is the breaking down of some of that reverence towards the NHS. And what Sajid Javid is really saying is, unless we do this, the entire system is just going to crumble. There won't be anything left to be superstitious and reverential about. We're going to have to start getting money in. So if you can afford it, don't dismiss the idea out of hand.
Okay, we are going to have to leave it there, but I hope that we revisit the story about the best tea dunking biscuits, which we didn't have time to get to, but you are both going to be with me in an hour's time as well, aren't you? Pete and Vidisha, see you then. Good stuff, Pete. You're probably going to change your shirt, and if I know you, it'll be a different one next hour, so stay with us to find out what it looks like. All the top stories coming up at the top of the hour. Do stay with us.